We saw one of the greatest sets of lost media discoveries last year. Several multi-year searches came to a close, and my personal favorite finds were the original Backrooms image and the full version of Everyone Knows That. Of course, I love the lost media finds, but something I've always had an interest in is old lost media. Stuff that has been missing for decades or even centuries. I don't see a lot of people covering this, so I've tried to make that my lost media niche, and I hope to expand that today with this video. I wanted to look back, way back, over 100 years ago, looking at a century's worth of lost media, beginning with 1900 and ending with 2000, having a piece of lost media for every year. I also thought it would be interesting to explore how media has evolved, where we started and where we end up. And if you're wondering, wait a minute, haven't I seen this video before? You might have, but a week after posting it, it was hit with copyright claims. So here we are with a re-upload, but don't worry. In reposting this video, I added a couple extra entries and fixed some mistakes from the last video. So it is a more refined version of the original. But that's enough yapping. We have over 100 stories of lost media to discuss, and it's only fitting we start at the turn of the century. 1900, Bolden Band Recordings. Buddy Bolden was one of the key figures in the early jazz scene of New Orleans, being born there in 1877. Bolden had a band that played with him, and they remained active between 1900 to 1907. Bolden's trombonist, Willie Cornist, claims that recordings were made of them playing. And this time, recording was done through a phonograph. Sound would be played into this big mouthpiece, and the vibrations would carve themselves into a wax cylinder, and that's where the sound was stored. Bolden's band stopped playing in 1907, following his own diagnosis of alcoholic psychosis, which later developed into schizophrenia. He would be admitted into the Louisiana State Insane Asylum, where he would spend the rest of his life. Since then, searches for this lost recording had been underway, to no avail. The biggest search was done by Donald Marquis, an author who wrote In Search of Buddy Bolden. In his research, he found a recording was made by a saloon operator named Oscar Zahn, but this recording, or any others, have not been found. We have very few of these wax cylinder recordings because they were not kept, and if they were kept, they weren't stored properly, meaning the wax would melt, ruining the recording. 1901, A Brilliant Career. Today, James Joyce is revered as one of the best authors to live, with his best well-known work being Ulysses. However, he wrote several books, plays, and poems, but some have not survived the tale of time. While attending college, he wrote a play called A Brilliant Career, which he soon burnt, not satisfied with his work. Nothing about his contents are known today. 1902, The Adventures of the Cabman. Did you know an estimated 90% of films made prior to 1929 are considered lost? Other estimates place it at 75%, but regardless, most silent era films are missing, and we will cover a handful of them today, and our first one hails from Poland, The Adventures of the Cabman. This was said to be the first Polish action film, and features a cabman who falls asleep at the wheel, and once he wakes up, he sees his horse was stolen and replaced with a donkey, the pinnacle of Polish comedy. 1903, A Guest of Honor. On October 16, 1901, President Teddy Roosevelt invited a man named Booker T. Washington to the White House for dinner. Booker was a leader in the black community at this time, a freed slave who would form the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, a school for African-American students where he worked as the principal. Booker became close with Teddy, prompting the invite in 1901, which resulted in backlash from the American South. This was during the time of Jim Crow, which were intense laws of separation between the races, prompting the aforementioned backlash. But this dinner remained in the mind of Americans for years. Immediately after the meeting, a man named Scott Joplin began writing an opera based off the dinner called A Guest of Honor. He filed a copyright in 1903, but did not include his score with it, stating it would be added later by one of his partners. It was never added, but in April of 1903, the opera was performed at the St. Louis Globe Democrat. Joplin was prepared to take this cross-country, but he ran into financial troubles, which led to a seizure of his assets, putting a stop to his tour. Since then, no copy of the opera's composition had been discovered. 1904, 2 George Millay films discovered. While this list is comprised of mostly lost media, it won't hurt us to sprinkle in some found media as well, especially when it involves George Millay, the father of science fiction films. Millay set himself apart using early adaptations of special effects, and he directed over 500 films in the span of 17 years, with his best well-known one being A Trip to the Moon, which has been playing in the background. But unfortunately, most of George Méliès's films are considered missing, for most of the same reason other silent films are. No one cared to preserve these old movies, and a lot of them were intentionally destroyed. You see, old film canisters were made of silver, so many times they were melted down and the metal was resold. This happened to a lot of George's films during World War I. You see, the French seized Méliès's studio to use as a hospital, and upon discovery of these canisters, they were melted down for their metal. Méliès, seeing the seizure of his studio, and seeing what the French army did to his films, and also facing a declining career, opted to destroy a lot of his own films in a blind rage, meaning just 200 of his 500 films are viewable today. But on occasion, silent films are being recovered, and this includes George Méliès's. In fact, A Trip to the Moon was one of these missing films to later be rediscovered, but we can now talk about two of his films made in 1904 that were found. The first one is a film called Conjuring Battle, and it's a 2-minute film featuring two magicians having a contest. The film was rediscovered and released in 2016, when 2/3 of the final product were found in the Czech film archives. The other film is The Wonderful Rose Tree, which is based off a Hindu legend featuring the Brahmin Ifiktar, who plants a rose garden that immediately sprouts. The flower continues to grow until a woman sprouts from it, and Ifiktar tries to woo her, but she has no interest, so in a rage, he destroys the rose bush. The film was lost and rediscovered in the early 2010s, when a documentary team discovered a damaged print of the film in the collection of one of George Méliès's films, and it was screened in 2017, marking it as found. 1905, Dingjin Mountain. The early 1900s saw massive innovations for film. We just got done discussing the legend George Méliès, hailing from France, but now we can cross the Pacific and discuss the first ever Chinese film, Dingjin Mountain. This was a silent film created in 1905 by Ren Zhifeng. Foreign films were incredibly popular in China at this time, and Ren wanted in the craze by creating his own. The film starred opera superstar Tan Jinpei, who was playing the character of Hong Zhong. I'm sorry for these pronunciations, but I promise it's not on purpose, I am trying. Anyways, Zhong was a general during the Eastern Han Dynasty, who is best well known for his participation in the Battle of Mount Dingjin. And this is what the film was about, that battle. The oldest surviving documentation of this film we have comes from a 1938 Chinese cinema magazine, mentioning the showing of scenes from this film. But we have little footage of it, and it's rumored the only surviving print was destroyed in a fire. However, I did find this clip, but I have my doubts that it's the actual film, because it seems very clear for surviving footage of a film made 120 years ago. 1906, The Story of the Kelly Gang. The Kelly Gang was a group of outlaws who operated out of Victoria, Australia, and was named after Ned Kelly, who is best well known for his suit of armor that he wore during a shootout with the police in 1879. This was a crudely fashioned suit that was made of 6mm thick iron and in total weighed 97 pounds, making it very cumbersome but also very protective, as it successfully repelled at least 18 bullets. However, his wrists and hands were not covered, so as they were damaged, he began to bleed profusely, eventually leading to his capture. This story exploded in the late 1800s and early 1900s in both Australia and the global community. One such person who was inspired by the story of the Kelly Gang was Charles Tate, who went on to produce a movie on the aptly named Story of the Kelly Gang. This was a silent era film produced in 1906 and followed the tales of the Kelly Gang, and ends with the infamous armored police shootout. And one of the actual suits used in the shootout was used for this film. Once the film came out, it was an enormous hit, securing 25,000 Australian pounds at the box office on only a 1,000 pound budget. The film's 1 hour and 10-minute runtime caused it to be the world's first feature-length film. As of 2024, roughly 17 minutes of the film remains. So what happened to cause only about a quarter of the film to remain? Well, like we discussed before, film preservation back then wasn't a very reliant practice. Up until the late 70s, only about 30 seconds of grainy footage existed of the movie. The first discovery of additional footage happened in 1978, when 210 feet of the film were found in a film collector's collection. In 1980, more footage of the film was found in a garbage dump, which, side note, is kinda sad to think about how common this was back then. A lot of these old films were probably just thrown away. Back to this, an additional 7 minutes were found and donated. All of this footage was found over nearly 50 years, which now amount to the 17 minutes that have been digitally restored and released by the National Film and Sound Archives. 1907, Sullivan and Poltergeist. Let's continue our discussion of nation's first films by now heading to Finland, where in 1907, Sullivan and Poltergeist was released, which is Finnish for The Moonshiners. We have no footage of this film today, but we do have a plot summary. The film features two moonshiners working out in the woods when a customer arrives. The pair take a break to drink with the man, and they begin playing cards, which leads to a fight. The police then arrive and arrest all three. The script was submitted as a part of a writing contest held in the country, and production began in early 1907, with the film premiering in May of the same year. The film was briefly discussed in local papers, praising it for its humor, but no copies exist. However, in 2017, to celebrate Finland's 100th anniversary of independence, the film was remade, but the original one, along with the submitted screenplay, are missing. 1908, Humpty Dumpty Circus. In 1952, a man named Albert E. Smith released a book called Two Reels and a Crank, where he described his time working on a stop-motion film. I'll read an excerpt from that book. "I used my little daughter's set of wooden circus performers and animals, whose movable joints enabled us to place them in balanced positions. It was a tedious process, and as much as the movement could be achieved only by photographing separately each change of position. Upon film buffs in more modern time realizing this was probably the first ever stop-motion film made, the search for it began. The first piece of evidence surrounding its validity comes from multiple newspapers released in 1908 and 1909 that had a section dedicated to a film review, which included a synopsis. It features a crowd going to a circus where they watch the performance of acrobatics. They also mentioned recognizing the toys used, which has led people to believe this was the toy used for the film, considering it was incredibly popular with children during the Christmas of 1907. Just 16 years later, another animated short featuring the exact same thing was created, but like the earlier one, it is also missing. 1909, A Geisha. A Geisha, Portuguese for the Geisha, was a Brazilian musical created by a man named Julio Ferraz. And this is our first sound film on the list. We also know about its existence from newspapers at the time, which highlighted the expansive cast. The review also dates its performance at November 8th, 1909. We only have two pictures of the opera, coming from the newspaper article. 1910, Dorothy and the Scarecrow in Oz. The Wizard of Oz is one of the most important films to ever be created. Of course, being the first film to have scenes in color. However, the movie came out on August 25th, 1939, and was based on a book released in 1900, and now I'll blow your mind, because 10 years later, in 1910, the first Wizard of Oz film came out, but this one is pretty different compared to the 1939 one. First of all, there's no collar, but more worrying, the author of the books, L. Frank Baum, had no input. It was made by the Selig Polyscope Company due to the financial failure of another Braun project created by the company. This film is available to watch in its entirety, a 13-minute run. But in that same year, two sequel films were made, which are missing. The first one is Dorothy and the Scarecrow in Oz, which picks up right where the other one ended. The film has Dorothy and Scarecrow in Oz, where they have become friends with the wizard. They then pick up the rest of the typical crew before heading to the Emerald City, which is where the third film in the trilogy takes place, the Land of Oz. This seemed to take place entirely in the Emerald City, where Dorothy stops a fucking rebellion. We only know about the two other films due to plot summaries posted in the newspaper. There is nothing surviving for either of them. 1911, At a Quarter of Two. At a Quarter of Two is another lost silent film being created by Independent Motion Pictures, or IMP. It starred Mary Pickford and King Baggett. Baggett plays an unemployed man who resorts to home robberies to support himself. He finds a vulnerable house to break into, but there's a sick child inside he ends up caring for, renouncing his thievery by the end of the movie. The film came out in 1911, but was later re-released in 1914 following the merger of IMP and other film studios into the Universal umbrella. It was retitled as Mr. Burglar MD, but even with both releases, the film is not available today. In 1995, film collectors found stills of the film in a series called Screen Snapshots. This was a series that looked at the behind the scenes of films being made. and there was a mention of at 1:45, but only still frames were included, no footage. 1912, footage of the Titanic. On April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic sank 1,300 miles off the coast of New York City, right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This sent shockwaves across the entire globe. And of course, in 1997, the film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet was released, cementing the incident in our memories. But even before this, 2 films about the Titanic came out. One in 1953 simply being called The Titanic, and another in 1958 being called A Night to Remember. However, this entry has nothing to do with these films and has everything to do with the actual ship, because ever since that fateful day in April, there have been searches for footage featuring the ship. As it stands today, we only have very sparse footage of the Titanic. For decades, we only had a clip of it being docked in Belfast, Ireland right after it was finished. Then in 1997, none other than James Cameron, the director of the Titanic, began a one-man search party for footage of the ship, and he found nothing. However, it is confirmed there is additional footage of the Titanic, but we will never see it, because it went down with the ship. A man and survivor of the Titanic named Lawrence Beasley later recounted his account of the shipwreck, where he described a passenger with the camera filming the near collision with another ship called the New York. However, this footage has never been recovered and is likely to be at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean with the ship. People theorize that this passenger filming could have been William Harbeck, a filmmaker on board who perished. 1913, The Werewolf. When it comes to staples of horror franchises, people of course will point to Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Leatherface, Pennywise, Pinhead, and many, many more modern icons. But before we had these guys, we had these guys, the Universal Monsters. These are the now classic icons of horror names like Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Mummy, and of course, the Werewolf. But even with the iconography that comes with him, doesn't mean we get to see his first appearance, because it is missing. The first film featuring the werewolf would come out in 1913, and was based off the short story The Werewolves, released 15 years earlier by Henry Beauregard. We only have a poster of the film and a plot summary, where it's revealed that this film features a wolf girl. It was based off the Navajo legend of Watuma, a girl who comes back to life after 100 years to hunt the man who killed her boyfriend, and she decides to take the form of a wolf. Far from the status quo of man looks at full moon and turns into a furry. Oh well, we all have to start somewhere. 1914, The Last Egyptian. If you remember a few entries ago, we discussed L. Frank Baum, the author of the Wizard of Oz series. But he was an active writer of nearly 40 years and released works outside of the Oz series. And in 1908, he released a book called The Last Egyptian, but he did not publish it under his name. He instead used the pseudonym Edward Stern. He did this a lot through his career, not wanting to rely on his own name to sell books. But this book was published and is readable today. However, 6 years after the book was published, Baum himself attempted to fund a film adaptation of the book. Let's do a quick plot summary. 3 characters travel to Egypt to find a tomb filled with treasures. The characters are Gerald Winston, the lead investigator, Kara, an Egyptian man with family ties to the tomb, and their translator, Tadros. The film was completed, but we only have part of it today, because soon after the film was finished, Baum Studio was purchased by MGM, and a story we're going to hear a lot about in this video. Full surviving copies were destroyed by the 1965 MGM archive fire. However, we do have part of it thanks to Bill Morrison. In 2002, he was making an experimental film and needed deteriorating silver nitrate film for it. And in his search, he accidentally uncovered reels of The Last Egyptian. After further investigations from film historians, it was found that 3 out of 5 reels of The Last Egyptian were stored there, meaning 60% of the film is viewable today. 1915, Graft. In the beginning of the 1900s, one thing drawing people to the theater were serial films, which were basically our modern-day TV shows. Each week, the serial would have a new release in theaters for everyone to watch, advancing a continuous plot with the same characters and narrative. By the time the 1920s came along, they were dying out, but in 1915, they were still incredibly popular. It's here in 1915 when Graft would come out. However, compared to the other serials, Graft was different. While the same cast was kept between each episode, the writing crew was different for each one, giving them complete control with how the plot would be progressed. The whole premise surrounds Dudley Larrington, a district attorney in New York City, investigating a gang called the Grafters. His investigation gets him killed, and his sons pick it up from there. In total, 20 episodes of Graft were made, but not a single one is available today. This is one I'd really want to see, and I would like to see someone try that today. A TV show with the same plot, but each episode is written by a different group of people. 1916, Fall of a Nation. Birth of a Nation is an infamous movie. It's a 3-hour-long film that begins with the American Civil War and ends with the Reconstruction period. It depicts the Triple Ks as heroes who stepped up to save the South from the North's oppressive rule. It's racist propaganda, which is exactly why Woodrow Wilson loved it. He played it in the White House, making it the first movie to be done so in the president's home. But it wasn't just Woodrow Wilson who loved this film, it was incredibly popular in its time. And in our time, apparently. It's got a 95 on Rotten Tomatoes. Jesus Christ. Nowadays, if a film is a big success, studios begin talking about how much they can extend and milk it for all it's worth. But that's not too much different from years before, because a sequel to Birth of a Nation was in the works, Fall of a Nation. The original Birth of a Nation was based on a book called The Klansman, which was written by Thomas Dixon Jr., and after seeing the film's success, he attempted to capitalize on a sequel. But what is Fall of a Nation about? It depicts a hypothetical future of the United States, where its pacifism causes its downfall. The story begins after the Lusitania was sunk, which, in our timeline, gets us into World War I. But in Fall of a Nation, we still stayed passive, allowing a millionaire named Charles Waldron to assist their German plot to take over the states. Germany attacks America and wins. After the fight was over, Germany placed Charles in charge of the conquered states. And then after this, a lady named Virginia Holland organizes a rebel army, known as the Daughters of Jail. They save the country and place us back at the top. The end. So where is this film? Well, it was made and released, and it sucked! It was panned critically, meaning no one cared to preserve it, and no known copies exist today. The only thing remaining is a handful of stills and advertisements. The film's original soundtrack also exists, but it's locked away at the Library of Congress. 1917, Cleopatra and El Apostol. When doing research for 1917, I encountered two stories I thought were both interesting and important in a historical context, and I had a hard time deciding which one to cover. So instead, I decided to cover both. I'll start with Cleopatra, probably the most famous lost silent film. The film is one of the most elaborate productions of early-day Hollywood, and it was expensive. The film cost around $500,000 to produce. At our modern times, that's around $8 million, which is still a drop in the bucket to our modern times, but back then, very expensive. It starred Theda Bara as the titular Cleopatra, and it was about her life and relationship with Julius Caesar, and it ends with her death. Cleopatra was very controversial for its time, causing different scenes to be cut and censored by varying theaters, beginning the film's long road to becoming lost. Despite its censorship, the film was a commercial success. But this story wouldn't stay positive for long. In 1937, a fire at the Fox studio destroyed the last two prints of film, among others starring Theda Bara, causing very little of it to remain in our modern times. As for El Apostol, it was an Argentinian film created by Corino Cristani and Federico Vey, and it was made to protest the Argentine president at the time, Hipólito Yrigoyen. It features him ascending to heaven, where he meets the god of thunder, Jupiter. He asks him for power to cleanse the country of corruption, and is given it. In the process, he destroys the entire city of Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. But, in the end, he wakes up, realizing it was a dream. The film is significant because of how it was created. It was made using cutout paper puppets, meaning this was the first ever feature-length animated film. It ran for 70 minutes at 14 frames a second, meaning the film was made up of 58,800 pictures. Unfortunately, all copies of the film were destroyed in a fire, and I think this is the biggest tragedy. Maybe I should say biggest so far, I still have 80 more entries to write. Honestly, both of these 1917 stories are tragedies, and I think I'd like to see these the most, but like I said, I have 80 more stories to cover, so let's move on. 1918, the Prussian Kur. By the time 1918 came around, World War I reached its 4-year mark, and America was getting in on the action. On the mainland, anti-German sentiment rose, with a lot of aspects of their culture being wiped away. For example, food items of German origin were renamed. Like hamburgers were now being called Liberty Steaks. Datsuns were renamed Liberty Hounds, and sauerkraut was renamed to Liberty Cabbage. But the wiping out of German culture didn't stop at renamings. Propaganda was running rampant, and that's where our story for 1918 comes from. When America was gearing up for war, Fox Studios produced a propaganda film called The Prussian Kur that was meant to fearmonger the threat of Germany. The film features an angry Kaiser Wilhelm launching submarines into American waters. On the mainland, German spies began to destroy railroads and factories, spreading fear into the American minds that their fellow citizens were evil. Also included in the film is a scene of a crucified soldier, which was a propaganda story spread during the Great War. The film ends when an American man named Dick Gregory leads a group of rebels against the German spies. The win emboldens American soldiers, who then go to Europe to liberate it, killing the Kaiser in the process. Rightfully so, this film was hated. It was lambasted for its attempted division of American citizens, and the creators later distanced themselves from it, citing regret of their involvement. Today, there are only a handful of film stills and advertising material of the film, and once again, it's thought any surviving copies were destroyed in the Fox Studio fires of 1937. 1919, Wassen. How about instead of a German propaganda film, we instead cover just a German film? I feel like this is the first entry where we know pretty much everything about it, with the only thing missing being the film itself, which is Wahnsinn, German for madness. This film was the debut of Conrad Veidt, who is best well known for his film The Man Who Laughs, which of course would later go on to inspire the Joker. Veidt was the lead in the film, and he was also the director. He played the character of Friedrich Lorenzen, a reclusive banker who is driven to madness when he learns that his wife was having an affair. He, at the suggestion of his doctor, leaves home to travel the world. His car is stopped by traveling fortune tellers who tell him to find the chest, which now becomes his obsession. The chest haunts his every waking moment, and he keeps seeing this flash of a woman's face. The face becomes real when Frederick encounters a boy selling knickknacks, and included is a key with that woman's face on it, so rightfully so, he buys it and goes home. Upon returning home, he sees his house servants arranging pieces of art delivered to him, and included is the chest. But it's locked, but the chest just so happens to take the key he previously bought. Now this is everything agreed upon, what's disputed is the ending. Because keep in mind, what we know about this film comes from 100-year-old German newspapers that are being translated. The first conclusion says that the chest is unlocked, and inside is the face of the woman he's been seeing, who then promptly locks him in the chest, and that's where the film ends. The other ending says that his ex-lover returns to Frederick, but sees him as a man driven to madness, so she locks him in the chest. For the actual production itself, we have nothing. But we do have the cast list, advertising material, and reviews. This is one of 2 films Conrad produced himself, the other one being missing as well. Neither film performed well at the box office, leading to their own loss. 1920, The Skyway Man. This is Ormir Locklear, a veteran of the United States Air Force. He served in World War I, and once it ended, he continued his skills as a pilot by forming the Locklear Flying Circus, a traveling air show in which he was the star. This gained the attention of Hollywood executives who contracted his services for a handful of films. The first one of these was The Gray Air Robbery, which was a major success, and they wanted him back for another immediate production. This would be The Skyway Man, a film starring Ormir playing the character of Captain Norman Craig, a shell-shocked veteran of the Great War, who was suffering from amnesia. In an attempt to get his memory back, he is put on a plane to help jolt his memory. This film entered production on June 11th, 1920, and the last shot was to be filmed on August 2nd. This would be a final stunt, one filmed at nighttime. This leaked to the public, and a massive crowd gathered to watch the shot. Included in this crowd was Viola Dana, Ormir's girlfriend. To help guide Ormir to ensure the shot was done right, floodlights were on, but they were to be turned off as they got closer to the ground. But when Ormir went for the ground, the floodlights were not turned off and he was blinded. Consequently, he crashed into the ground, killing him. This scene was filmed. Cameras were rolling the entire time, but the footage is missing. But here's the real kicker. It was seen. This footage was kept in the final film, and it was released to the masses. The cameras even caught the horrified reaction of Viola Dana. The full, uncensored scene was left in the final product, but there's no available footage of it. Not only is there no available footage of the crash, there's no footage of anything in the film. It is completely lost. 1921, Winner of the West. We're back with another serial, this one being The Winners of the West. This series is based off the Fremont expedition led by John Fremont. It's actually based off his fourth expedition, which began in 1948. It features his travels through Oklahoma, where he's aided by a man named Arthur Standish, a mysterious traveler he picks up along the way. We know nothing about the plot, and we only have the poster today. All 18 episodes of Winners of the West are missing. 1922, Indy 500 radio broadcast. If I wanted to, I could have made this entire list dedicated to lost race coverage. Every time I would search for a year, at the top of each list would be some sort of racing event coverage being missing. However, I didn't want to talk about 100 lost races, but I do want to talk about this one, the 1922 Indy 500. The Indy 500 began in 1911, meaning this would have been the 12th event. It's a car race which consists of 200 laps around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which equates to 500 miles. The 1922 event was the first one to be broadcasted live, over the radio of course. Prior to the event, a test of the newly developed radio equipment went through, where it was found that both the race and judges' commentary could be plainly heard. So the race comes and everything goes great. Some guy named Jimmy Murphy won. However, due to the emphasis surrounding this medium, it leaves us with no aspect of the race to be seen today. I mean, we know who won and all that, but we can't hear the live broadcast. It just wasn't possible to record live radio broadcasts at this point, and the oldest Indy 500 broadcast we have is from 1939, 17 years later. 1923, Human Wreckage. You may think of the war on drugs as this thing exclusive to the 70s and up, but there were concerns from the American public decades before this, and we can discuss an example of that right now with Human Wreckage. This was another silent film released on June 17, 1923, and starred Dorothy Davenport. Her husband, Alan, who was played by James Kirkwood, is an attorney. He's given a case from his wife to represent a man named Jimmy Brown, who's addicted to morphine. Alan gets him acquitted, but later in the film, he gets addicted to morphine. Jimmy becomes a taxi driver, but then learns his lawyer's addicted, so he decides to do something about it. Now, does he hold an intervention or get the guy to rehab? No. He has a passenger in his car who he learns is a heroin dealer, so he decides to drive his taxi into a train transporting narcotics, destroying it and killing them both. The film then ends with Dorothy Davenport directly addressing the audience, warning them to not get hooked on drugs, because if you do, your taxi driver will crash into a fucking train. Same old story, film is lost, but we have stills and the poster today. 1924, 8-hour cut of Greed. If it isn't Cleopatra, then this might be the holy grail of lost media pertaining to lost movies. Greed was written and directed by Erich von Stroheim, and is still considered one of the greatest films to be created. But at its 2-hour runtime, we are missing 3/4 of it today, because Erich wanted to release an 8-hour long version of the film. Only 12 people are known to have seen this version, which, by the way, they were quoted as saying this is the greatest thing they've watched and a greater film would never be made. But now we enter a mess of a director versus a studio, a common thing that happens today as well. It's not known fully if this initial 8 hours was initially trimmed down by force of the studio or will of the director. But what is known, after this initial trim down, MGM Studios forced more and more and more cuts until we're left with the 2-hour version. Like I said, this film, the 8-hour cut, is one of the holy grails of lost media, and people are still holding out hope that this 8-hour version will be released. There are rumors about this full version, and Eric himself claimed that Benito Mussolini had an original copy. Guys, I'll be honest here, there's a lot more to this story, but we have 76 others to talk about, but I'm getting interested myself. If you want a full video dedicated to greed, please let me know, because I'm game to do it. This is George Mallory, an early explorer of Mount Everest, and he wanted to be the first one to summit the mountain. He began his expedition on June 6, 1924, and was joined by his climbing partner Andrew Irvine. However, this would be the last time either of them would ever be seen. It wouldn't be for another 50 years before Mallory's body would be found. On May 1st, 1999, American climber Conrad Anker found George's body. Several of his bones were broken, leading investigators to believe he fell and broke his leg. Andrew Irvine, on the other hand, his body, or at least part of it, was found last year in October. However, it's not known if these two made it to the top of Mount Everest before they perished, and there may be a piece of evidence on the mountain pointing towards an answer. When Mallory went on his ill-fated expedition, he took a camera with him, a Kodiak VPK, and it's never been recovered. Which you now may ask me, Tanman, if this camera is found, what's the big deal? Would anything even be viewable? Well, according to Kodiak, it would be. Technicians from the company have assured the public that if the camera itself isn't damaged, then the film might be recoverable. Good luck finding it though, because finding a tiny little pocket camera on Mount Everest is going to be magnitudes more difficult than finding a needle in a haystack. I am incredibly interested in this story, and expect sometime this year a video on the pair, their climb, the camera, and much, much more. 1925, Idaho. No, I'm sorry to let you down, but the state of Idaho still stands defiantly in the Northwest. This entry instead refers to another Western serial. This one consisted of 10 episodes, but once again, we have no footage of it. Just a cast list, episode titles, and a poster. 1926, The Great Gatsby. Before the famous 2013 Great Gatsby film, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio, which is his second time being here, there were 3 other film adaptations of the 1925 book. There was one in 1974, 1949, and then the focus of the century, the first adaptation, which came out in 1926. All of them shared the same simple title of The Great Gatsby. In February of 1926, a mere 10 months after the book came out, a screenplay of the novel was taken to Broadway, and soon after, Paramount purchased the film rights for a mere $45,000. Production on the film began soon after. I'm sorry to interrupt the recording, but I'm looking at my other monitor over here, and is this like spray to make your room smell like Mountain Dew? Where the hell was I? Production on the film began soon after, and it would be released on November 21st, 1926. And the film was hated by just about everyone who watched, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, the guy who wrote the book, by the way. He and his wife were shown an early screening of the film, and they left in the middle of it. But we do have more than just advertising material and photos of the film. We have a 1-minute long trailer featuring scenes from the movie. There have been searches for the film, with the biggest effort coming from Wheeler Winston Dixon, a professor of film studies at the University of Nebraska, but he unfortunately found no additional footage. 1927, Babe Comes Home. Babe Ruth is the most famous baseball player to live, I think. I really don't like baseball. I hate playing it, and I definitely hate watching it. Jackie Robinson is probably up there too, but this entry refers to Babe Ruth's second film he was in. He plays a character named Babe Duncan, a baseball player with the Los Angeles Angels. He strikes up a relationship with his laundress, who is played by Anna Q. Wilson. The film had music and sound effects, but no dialogue was included. In the same year, The Jazz Singer came out, which was the first film with sound dialogue to be included. But as for Babe Comes Home, it's not been seen since its release in theaters. If I haven't made it evident yet, I certainly will as we go on, but I'll lay it out plainly. I love old horror. Films from the early 1900s that tackled the blossoming genre, especially using a lot of early applications of CGI and special effects. In fact, I'm gonna say this a lot too, I'd love to make a video, something about old horror lost media, maybe for Halloween. But right now, let's talk about The Wizard, a completely lost horror film based off a book from 1911. The film follows Dr. Paulie Coriolis, where his son is convicted of a crime he didn't commit. So in revenge, the doctor cuts off one of his friend's face, puts it on a gorilla. The doctor then teaches the gorilla how to recognize the specific smells of perfume and cigar smoke, so that the doctor then puts these smells onto his would-be victims and sends his gorilla out at nighttime to capture them and bring them back to be murdered. Unfortunately, this one was a victim of the Fox Studio fires, and I do not care what it takes. We need to find this one immediately. 1928, On Trial. On Trial had 2 releases, both as a silent film and a sound one, but I'll spoil the entry now. Neither are available today. The film began as a successful Broadway play that first premiered in 1914, with it being made into a film 14 years later. What we know of the film is minuscule, just that a man goes on trial and gets a moron for an attorney to represent him. Once again, the film was remade, this time coming out in 1939, and this one is viewable in its entirety. But let's get back to 1928. We do have part of it being the soundtrack to the film and the trailer, giving us a glimpse into what it would have looked like. 1929, Fox Melatoon Follies. This is another lost film, featuring a character named Lilla Beaumont, who joins a Broadway show, much to the dismay of her boyfriend George Shelby. I don't know what this guy's problem was, because once she refuses to leave, he buys a stake in the play and tries to remove her. But she ends up becoming the star once the actual lead has to step down. She performs the play and it's a hit, leading to George selling his stake, which leaves them rich. The film ran for 8 reels, which is about 80 minutes, and only the soundtrack remains to 2 reels. There is a short clip available to watch, being placed in another Fox film called The Bella Samoa, but other than that, it's completely lost. 1930, The Furies. Like we mentioned earlier, the first sound film was The Jazz Singer, released in 1927. 3 years later, the same director created The Furies, which is completely missing. This film features a lady named Fifi Sands, who seeks a divorce from her unfaithful millionaire husband. After finally being granted it, he soon turns up dead, and Sands, along with her new husband, are the key suspects. The Lost Media Wiki article claims that private individuals have copies of the film, but I followed their sources and I couldn't find where they're getting it from. But we are getting into the 1930s now, which is the decade where film preservation really tried to begin, so expect to see more partially lost things, not completely lost. 1931, Pelidopolis. If you remember back to 1917, we discussed El Apostol, the first ever feature-length animated film created by Argentine filmmaker Ciriano Cristani. The story Pelidopolis is very similar to El Apostol. It's another feature-length Argentine film created by Ciriano. It's even another critique of Hipólito Yrigoyen. This Carino guy hated his ass. Bro invented an entire film genre just to hate. But Pelidopolis features the president, now as a pirate, sailing the seas as he's chased by sharks. A year into film production, Yrigoyen was actually outed by a military coup, which halted work on the film. But he still wanted this film to be seen, so he decided to cut back the main character's ties to the former president. The film was released, but it's not viewable today and it's likely to never be seen, same as El Apostol. This is due to two fires that broke out, one in 1957 and one in 61 that destroyed most copies of the film. We do have some pieces of Pelidopolis left, which came from a making-of documentary that's been preserved. 1932, The Mummy deleted scenes. Remember the Universal monsters we talked about earlier? Well, we're entering their era in their entirety, and we can now discuss The Mummy. Now, this film is viewable in its entirety, but there are some deleted scenes that are missing. The Mummy film was created as a result of Tutankhamun's tomb being opened in 1922, 10 years prior to the film being made. But like we said, this film is available, but there are some deleted scenes in varying states of completion. The scenes show the past lives of Helen, which was the mummy's love. It reveals how many times she was reincarnated. These scenes were filmed and cut at the very end for unknown reasons. When Universal was releasing this movie for home media, they searched for the scenes but could not find them, only screenshots. 1933, The Superman. Growing up, I was incredibly fortunate to have not just my grandparents, but I also had my great-grandparents. They were born in the 1920s, which meant they saw a lot of history happen. The Great Depression, World War II, the moon landing, they all got to see it in their lifetime. Something not as important, but still weird to me, was the fact that they were older than the characters of Batman and Superman. There was a time in their lives when they had no concept of a Batman or a Superman. And it wasn't like a few days or months or years, they were young adults when the two characters were created. The character Superman came first, debuting as a part of Action Comics #1, which was released in 1938. But the character had history before this. The creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, first released a comic in 1932 called The Reign of the Supermen. But the Superman in this comic is very different compared to the modern day iteration. In fact, they're nothing alike. Superman in this comic is a homeless man named Bill Dunn who is recruited by a scientist for an experiment. Of course, the experiment goes wrong and Dunn becomes a telepath, who promptly becomes drunk with power and wants to take over the world. Nothing similar to our modern day Superman stories, but in that same year, a story more similar to the Superman we know was made. After Reign was published, the duo decided that Superman should be a hero, not a villain. The two got in contact with the publisher, and they got hard to work with their new Superman comic. They had a full issue made, ready to go and be published, but unfortunately, the publisher pulled out, and no other publishers wanted the story, causing Siegel to throw the entire issue into his fireplace, forever destroying a piece of comic and pop culture history. The only thing that survives is the cover, but Siegel and Shuster have revealed some details of the story. First of all, Superman was not an alien, and instead was a human vigilante who stalked rooftops and wore a cape, much like the later superhero Batman. This is all that's been revealed, and Superman collectors have worked tirelessly to find a copy to no avail. 1934, Farnsworth Broadcast. Philio Farnsworth was a pioneer in the television industry and made a lot of critical contributions to video as we know it today. Not only did he contribute, he invented the TV, first demonstrating his invention in 1927. But these TVs had many mechanical parts inside of them, and Farnsworth wanted his TV to be something entirely electric. So, he worked on this design for the next 7 years before he was ready to show it off in 1934. Beginning on August 25th, several televisions were set up at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Broadcasts ran all day, showing off things such as a football game. The exact one isn't known, but this marked the first football game to be shown on TV. Cameras were also set up at the Institute, meaning people could see themselves on TV. For 75 cents, or $17 today, citizens of Philly were granted access to these TV broadcasts. The event was only supposed to last for 10 days, but due to the amount of people still attending on day 10, it was extended for another 10 days. But, due to technological limitations, all TV broadcasts prior to World War II were lost. There just wasn't a way to record them, meaning they are not available. 1935, Chunhaejin. By the time 1935 rolled around, movies were incredibly popular in Korea, but they were all foreign imported films, few were being made in-house. This goes double for sound films, and Chunhaejin was the first sound Korean film made. This was an adaptation of a book released years prior, and details the plot of a wedding being interrupted by the arrest of the bride by another man who was jealous of her. The film was both criticized and beloved in the nation. On one hand, this was a technological marvel, and was being touted as such. But on the other hand, this was the first film of its kind, and had a lot of technological errors. However, love or hate the film, it's not viewable today. This is the story of most Korean films produced in this era, as the next few decades brought chaos across the country. Japanese occupation, World War II, and the Korean War devastated the island and led to the loss of most films created there. 1936, Summer Olympics. 1936 would be the first year the Summer Olympics would be televised, but it was the 10th year they were held. They took place in Berlin, Germany, while it was under control from this guy, I'm sure you know him. The Chancellor of Germany wanted to use this event to promote his ideals, attempting to forbid Jewish and black people from participating. Facing threats of boycotts, Germany acquiesced and allowed these folks to participate. And of course, this is the Olympics where Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals, making him the most successful individual in the Olympics. Alright, that's the event. Let's discuss the broadcast. Television was still a new technology, and Germany had to set up special rooms for people to watch at. In total, 25 viewing stations were set up across Berlin, and access to them was free. Two companies were responsible for this: Telefunken and Fernseh. They claimed after the event that 72 hours of it was broadcasted live. But like the Farnsworth broadcast a few entries back, we have no footage of the live broadcast. But we do have video of the event and pictures of the broadcasting camera, but once again, we have no actual live footage. Albert Fish was one of the most reprehensible people to live. An American serial killer who targeted children between the years of 1870 to 1936. Albert Fish murdered and cannibalized as many as 10 children, and would sometimes write letters to the police or the victims' families detailing their unfortunate fates. One of these letters got him caught. It was investigated and found to have come from the New York Private Chauffeur Benevolent Association, and all members there were forced to take a handwriting test. Soon after this, Albert Fish was caught. He confessed to his crimes, but tried to plead insanity to escape justice. This, however, didn't work, and he was sentenced to execution via electric chair on March 22nd, 1935. Before he passed away, he wrote several letters leading up to his execution, but the contents of them are not known. This is because his lawyer, James Dempsey, refused to disclose what was in them. Dempsey spoke on this to the media, saying, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read." This is all we know about them, and it's unknown whether these notes still exist or were completely destroyed by Dempsey. 1937, Children of Loneliness. Children of Loneliness was a film meant to fearmonger against people in the LGBTQ+ community. It revolved around Bobby, a lesbian who has a crush on her roommate Eleanor. Running side by side of this, another character is working in a law office, and she has a crush on an artist who works with her, but he happens to be gay. After being told he'll never have a normal marriage, the male artist takes his own life. Back to Bobby and Eleanor, the two end up fighting, and Bobby tries to throw acid on Eleanor, but misses and burns herself. In a panic, she runs out into the street, where she's hit by a car. After the film would end, a doctor would then come into the movie theater, handing out pamphlets with the cure to homosexuality. The film itself is completely lost. 1938 FA Cup Final. The 1938 FA Cup Final was the first one to be fully televised, and was the culmination of the 63rd FA Cup season. The match itself was goalless, which led to extra time being added. In the end, George Much of Preston North End scored, winning the game. While the actual broadcast is missing, there are segments available to watch thanks to news broadcasts at the time, and footage of the winning goal was captured. 1939, Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. While we're creeping up on Christmas, we're way past Thanksgiving. I did write this a day before Thanksgiving, so we're good. And this is another story of lost early television broadcasts. The Macy's Thanksgiving Parade is held annually, and 1939 was the 16th one to take place. The parade was broadcasted across both radio and TV in New York City, making it to be the first to be shown on TV. But once again, there just wasn't a way to save broadcast footage yet. However, while the actual broadcast is lost, we do have a home movie of the event, as well as pictures of it posted in the newspaper. 1940, Henrik Ross's photos. At the start of World War II, Germany and the Soviet Union invaded and split Poland in half. On the German zone, massive prison camps were set up across the area, and the second largest one was the Lodz Ghetto. Like any of these zones set up by Germany in World War II, life here was hell on earth. Areas were overcrowded, people were suffering and dying from malnutrition, and anyone trying to escape was to be killed on sight. After these zones were established, a man working for the Jewish Council in Germany was relocated to the Lodz Ghetto. This man was Henrik Ross. Ross was previously employed as a newspaper photographer, and this is what he was to do here. He took photos of the ghetto, but was under strict surveillance and orders, being told what to and what not to take photos of. However, Ross was creative and made sure to sneak photographs of all the atrocities taking place, which included public hangings, children digging for scraps of food, people being carted away to their deaths, and much, much more. If there was something bad taking place here, Ross photographed it. By the time 1944 came around, World War II was coming to a close, and the Lodz Ghetto began to be liquidized. Mass graves were dug, and Ross was going to be placed in one. He had to leave, but couldn't take all his photos, which were now numbering close to 6,000. So, he placed them into a metal box and buried them. He returned in January 1945 and dug them up. The box was still there, but not all of his photos were. A lot of them had water damage, which caused over half of them to be unrecoverable. However, he was able to use the other half in trials against German war criminals. Once the dust settled on both the war and the preceding trials, Ross lived a life of peace, donating his photos to museums so that the hell on earth that was the Lodz Ghetto would never be forgotten. 1941, White Christmas radio broadcast. Since Christmas is in 4 days, it's only fitting we cover a piece of Christmas lost media, especially if it's coming from the legend Bing Crosby. I'm a huge sucker for Christmas music. Stuff from Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Jay Schlatt, and of course Bing Crosby. And my favorite from him is White Christmas. But you heard the entry title, so what's missing? Well, nothing now. But the original radio broadcast of the song was lost for a period of time. The record of the song was first released in 1942, but a year prior to this, Crosby performed it live on an NBC radio show on Christmas 1941. The recording was lost for 70 years, until on Christmas 2011, the Bing Crosby estate loaned the record to CBS News Sunday morning, and a brief segment of it was played, along with other Crosby works. Seeing that a segment of it was played meant the full version of it existed, and on September 14th, 2018, Lost Media Wiki user RNO got in contact with the Crosby estate and was given the full recording. Although it's very deteriorated and sounds like something out of Local 58 or the Mandela catalog, it is considered found.
Just like the ones I used to know.
1942, 15,000 Dibujos. 15,000 Dibujos, Spanish for drawings, is a Chilean animated film created between the years of 1937 and 1942. To get the film created, the two directors, Jaime Escudero and Juan Carlos Trupp, secured funding from two production companies and their friends and family. Like we said, production lasted for 5 years and was pushed into completion by Walt Disney. He visited Chile in 1941 and saw their progress, encouraging them to finish it. 15,000 Dibujos features the characters of Copachita, a condor, a cougar named Manihul, who is just like a Mapuche, which was a group of Native Americans that live in Chile, and No Benihaga, the Hueso, a Chilean cowboy. The film was finally shown in December of 1942, and it was beloved, considering it was the first in-house animated film. From here, it's gone missing, but there is hope for this one to be found. As it stands today, it's known that Carlos Trupp was given a full copy, and there have been fragments recovered and shown to the public. 1943, Crazy House. Crazy House was a 1943 film that starred the comedic duo of Ol Olsen and Chick Johnson. It also featured other famous comedians of the time, most notably Shemp Howard of the Three Stooges. The film features the duo playing themselves, leaving Broadway to make their own movie. But the studio wants nothing to do with them, so they leave to make a movie on their own. The film had a home release in 2005 and was known to be shown on TV in 2003. This was due to famed director Quentin Tarantino naming it as one of his favorite films. But neither of these instances led to it being found. Instead, a YouTuber named Tropes Are Dangerous posted a copy of the film to YouTube, where it was blocked. However, it was archived on the Internet Archive and it's available to watch in its entirety. 1944, The Moabit Notebooks. This is Musa Kali, a Soviet poet living in Russia. He made a name for himself by writing pro-communist poetry, but would volunteer for the Red Army in 1941. Khalil would soon be captured by the Germans and was sent to the Moabit prison in Berlin on August 10, 1943, where he would be killed a year later on August 25, 1944. But in that year, he continued to work as a poet. He learned German the best he could, speaking to other prisoners and using his connections to get paper and writing utensils. He wrote poetry, accounts of prison life, and anti-fascist papers, which were all then compiled into the Moabit notebooks. As we stand today, we know of 3, and we have 2 of them. The first notebook was preserved by 2 prisoners of Germany and later the Soviet Union. The second was saved by Mussa's cellmate André Timmermans, and was passed on to the Tatar Union of Writers. Finally, a third notebook was archived with Submerge, a Russian counterintelligence agency, but it's now gone missing. 1945, Spellbound Missing Sequence. In the early horror genre, there is no man more important than Alfred Hitchcock. For 10 years, he ran a show called Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where in each episode, a different plot with horror-like themes would progress, kinda like the Twilight Zone. Hitchcock also directed Psycho, which ushered in the slasher genre. But Psycho wasn't the only film Hitchcock created. He also made Spellbound, which is available to watch today. But there is a deleted scene we can discuss. For a dream sequence in the film, Alfred hired famous artist Salvador Dali to design a dream sequence for the film. If you don't know, Dali specialized in surrealism, painting that was supposed to look unordinary, hence why Hitchcock wanted him for a dream sequence. The scene was created and lasted for 20 minutes, but only 2 minutes of it was left in the film. The director had this to say: "The more I look at the dream sequence for Spellbound, the worse I feel it to be. It's not Dali's fault, for his work is much finer and much better for the purpose than I ever thought it would be. It is the photography, setup, lightings, etc." So the director basically took it out because Dali cooked too hard, and it stood out from the rest of the film. 1946, Faraway Hill. We've reached our first soap opera of the list, a genre of TV that's defined by a weekly format that features the same characters in day-to-day situations, usually with a lot of drama and emotion smacked on for good measure. They started as radio programs sponsored by soap companies, and that's where the term soap opera came from. The focus of this entry is Faraway Hill, which only lasted for 3 months, October through December of 1946. The show followed Karen St. John, a widow in New York City who moves back to her rural hometown. Episodes were made with a budget of $300 a week and were broadcasted live, which follows the trend of every episode being missing. The production company behind Faraway Hill, Dumont, went off the air in 1956, destroying a lot of their catalog as they went. This likely included any kept media surrounding the first soap opera. 1947, FA Cup Final. We're back with another soccer match broadcast. This time, the 1947 final played between Charlton and Burnley at Wembley Stadium. This was the end of the first FA season post-World War II and saw a victory for Charlton in a match that went into extra time. This was the 4th FA final to be broadcasted live on TV. There were concerns about the broadcast, as the nation was still facing electricity rations. But the government gave special permission to the BBC to broadcast it, but only for 40 minutes. While we are out of World War II and live broadcast archiving was beginning, we don't have any footage of the actual broadcast, but we do have newsreel footage. 1948 Summer Olympics. While we're at it, let's cover another sports event broadcasted live through the BBC. Once World War II was over, London won the bid to host the Summer Olympics, the first one held since 1936. Britain was out of World War II for 3 years at this point, but was still feeling the effects, which led to the rationing of food and clothes. Because of this, the Olympics were nicknamed the Austerity Games, with the nation only spending £730,000 to put it together. TVs were becoming more commercial in the late 40s, and 15,000 people in London had access to one. Therefore, this is where the live feed focused on. A new broadcasting center for both radio and television was constructed, which consisted of 16 studios staffed by 750 people. In total, about 68.5 hours were broadcasted to 100,000 households, but we're in a similar story. None of that live broadcast was archived, but we do have newsreel footage today. 1949, Farewell Amanda. I am a massive Frank Sinatra fan, so I was happy, or maybe disappointed, to see him on a lost media list. Farewell Amanda was originally written for a romantic comedy called Adam's Rib, and Sinatra was given the task of singing it. The song was written with a single verse and refrain, but in the movie, you could only hear Sinatra sing for 6 seconds, which is not the entire song. Upon the creation of Frank Sinatra in Hollywood, a compilation album, searches for the full recording were conducted, and it was found. But the disc it was on was completely disintegrated. Another film was found, but it only had the backing piano, no Sinatra vocals. 1950, Georgie Small vs. Laverne Roach. On February 22nd, 1950, two boxers, Georgie Small and Laverne Roach, had a match at the St. Nicholas Arena in Manhattan, and this was broadcasted live. Roach was making a name for himself in the boxing scene, previously serving with the United States Marines where he honed his skills. However, this match would unfortunately be his last. The fight was to go on for 10 rounds, and on the 8th, Georgie Small landed a blow into Roach's jaw, and he was bleeding from his lips and mouth. He pushed into the 9th round and 10th, where Small landed another big hit on Roach, bringing him to the mat. In the process, he spewed blood onto both the mat and his shorts. But he stood once more before being brought down for the final time. The match was called, and Roach was in the corner answering interview questions before suddenly saying, "My luck is running out," where he fell unconscious. He was taken to the hospital, where he died 14 hours later. Small faced no charges. It was a complete accident that Roach died in the match. His cause of death was a subdural hemorrhage, and it led to reform within the boxing world, with a higher focus on how previous matches affected fighters before they entered their next one. This fight was shown live, but say it with me. No broadcast footage is available, but this match is completely lost. There's no newsreel footage or home recording of the fight either, only pictures. 1951, The World Is Yours. We are now in the back half of entries, 50 more to go. Let's get it done. We're starting with a pretty big milestone, our first color TV show, that being The World Is Yours. The show itself was pretty short-lived, only lasting from June to September of 1951, but a new episode would air every day. The show is hosted by Ivan Sanderson, a biologist who would dedicate each episode to a different lesson on the natural world. But we're in the early 1950s, color TV was far from commercialized yet. That would come a few years later. Also, the technology used to broadcast this show made it inaccessible to black and white TV sets, meaning a grand total of 200 people could watch The World Is Yours. Combine that with the oncoming Korean War taking away production materials from this show, it leaves us with every aspect missing. There's no episode catalog, no production screenshots, definitely no footage. There is practically no trace of this show, save for TV show catalogs printed in the time. 1952 FA Charity Shield. The FA Community Shield is an annual soccer match held between the FA Cup holders and the previous Premier League winners. It's held to fundraise for various charities and was first held in 1922, but it was called the Charity Shield in this time. We fast forward to 1952 during the 30th annual Charity Shield. This was the second one to be shown on TV, and again, saving live broadcast wasn't feasible yet, but we're getting there, I promise. This match was held between Manchester United facing off against the FA Cup holders Newcastle United, and Manchester pulled through, winning 4-2. But there's no footage from this from what I can see. Of course, nothing from the broadcast remains, but there's also nothing from the newsreel. 1953, Criswell Predicts. This is Jerron Criswell King, an American psychic who made a name for himself by predicting events. He proclaimed to have not spoken until he was 4, when during a thunderstorm, he said the rain will stop, and lo and behold, it stopped. Which, first of all, imagine having a kid who hasn't spoken yet, and then this big-ass storm rolls in, and your creepy mute kid stands up and says, "The rain will stop." And look at that, the rain stopped. Anyways, that's his story. He claimed to also have worked on the radio with his predictions, and later was published in Spaceway magazine. And from this, he was given his own TV show called Criswell Predicts. But this show started off as short, 5-minute long infomercials to advertise his family's vitamins. From here, he turned this into his own prediction show, appropriately called Criswell Predicts. This was a daily show that lasted for 8 years, but we don't have a single episode. The only thing we have is an idea of what the format would have looked like, thanks to Plan 9 from Outer Space. a science fiction film that he opened, recreating his show. It's likely that the tapes used to record these episodes were wiped and reused, considering they were expensive at this time. Get used to that. That's a big reason why a lot of Doctor Who episodes are missing, and I'm sure we're going to run into that more as we move on. 1954, Gojira deleted scenes. In 1954, Godzilla made his big screen debut, turning him into a now staple of pop culture history. The movie had mixed reviews at release, but made a lot of money, spawning a sequel the following year and a franchise for decades to come. This movie is fully available, but a scene was cut from it, which is now missing. It's an alteration to the scene where Godzilla looks over the hill of Odo Island. In the deleted scene, Godzilla has a cow in his mouth that he then eats. It was cut as the directors were worried about the scale, with them believing that the lizard eating a cow would make him appear smaller than what he actually is. The scene was cut, and if films weren't being preserved, deleted scenes definitely were not being preserved, leaving us with a single frame of the scene. 1955 Scottish Cup Final. This is our, third soccer match to discuss? But now we're in Scotland, so it's kind of different, I guess. This was the culmination of the 1954-55 Scottish Cup and saw two clubs, Clyde and Celtic, facing off at Hampden Park in Glasgow. This was the first Scottish soccer match to be broadcasted, and it ended in a draw between the two teams. For a time, the entire live broadcast was available to watch, as we're finally getting into the era where these practices were becoming commonplace. However, it's likely the tapes used to capture this footage were wiped and reused, leaving us with the newsreel footage of the time. No part of the live broadcast remains today. 1956 Eurovision Song Contest. One of my favorite trends on TikTok this year was the whole rally behind Joost Klein at this year's Eurovision. Yes, that was this year. Hasn't time dragged and sped by at the same time? This marked the first year I cared about Eurovision, but marked the overall 68th event, and it was first held in 1956. The first event had delegations from 7 countries, and they each performed 2 songs, with the winner this year being Switzerland. Few people had televisions in Europe at this time, but there were cameras there to capture footage for the few who did. And of course, the entire thing was broadcasted live on radio. There is video footage of the winning performance, but I'm not sure if this was the live footage or captured for newsreel. 1957, Tokyo 1960. As we mentioned earlier, Godzilla made his big screen debut in 1954 and had a follow-up the following year and a franchise after that. But other nations saw this giant atomic lizard and said, hey, I want one of those. Rather, it's the bootleg North Korean Pulgasari, which I want to make a standalone video discussing, or it's Tokyo 1960, the Filipino version. We know practically nothing about this film, and it was first brought to the internet's attention in 2008 on an Atomic Monster blog, and from here, people have just theorized to its origins. It's not known whether if this was a re-edit, redub, or a completely new film. And if you haven't guessed yet, it's completely missing. 1958, Luigi Musso crash footage. This is Luigi Musso, a Formula 1 driver active between the years of 1953 through 1958, where his career would unfortunately be cut short by a crash. He was participating in the 1958 French Grand Prix, where he was racing for Ferrari. During the 10th lap, he was in second place and rounded a corner at 150 miles per hour, smashing into a curb. He was life-flighted out, but he soon passed away after arriving at the hospital. While the race was filmed, there is no footage available of the racer's crash. 1959 Street Fighter. Let's start by saying this has nothing to do with the game franchise, considering the first game would come out nearly 30 years after this film. However, there's not a lot we do know about this film, with what we do know coming from a forum post discussing the movie. The film was primarily made by Arthur White, who wrote, produced, edited, and starred as the primary antagonist. It follows a teenager who falls in line with a gang, but after his girlfriend dies, he becomes a model civilian. According to that same forum post, the only original celluloid copy was destroyed once it was copied onto a VHS tape, and this same tape was going up for auction. However, this was in 2014 and there hasn't been an update, leaving us with a solitary poster. 1960, Yasha Torpakov. Yasha Torpakov was a Soviet drama film that appears to be about workplace disputes. It's about this guy named Yasha working at a construction site where a welder dies and his boss is replaced. This summary is coming from a Russian film website, so mistranslations are possible, because when I see this poster, I think, oh, maybe a spy drama, not like blue-collar politics. But this film is entirely missing for not even a fun reason. No government censorship or studio fire or anything, it just wasn't preserved. There are a handful of stills and posters though. 1961, The Avengers. The Avengers are one of Marvel's leading hero lineups, but that has nothing to do with our entry. No, the Avengers we care about right now refers to a 1961 British spy series that lasted for 8 years, for a total of 6 seasons and 135 episodes. Everything past Season 1 is found, and in Season 1, 3 episodes are completely available, 10 are partially lost, and 13 are completely lost. Included in the partially lost episode list is the first episode, Hot Snow, which premiered on January 7th, 1961, and only 14 out of 50 minutes were archived. In a story very similar to why a lot of Doctor Who episodes are lost, tapes that stored the master copies were wiped or reused by the BBC, and the episodes we have today come from outside sources, whether it be people recording at home, or subsequent BBC studios in other nations having straggling copies. 1962, Bulgasari. Remember earlier how I mentioned Pulgasari, the bootleg Godzilla film made in North Korea? Well, in some real bullshit, there's a South Korean bootleg Godzilla film called Bulgasari, and it's missing. Pulgasari is actually a remake of Bulgasari, but we're talking about Bulgasari right now. Pulgasari maybe later down the line if people are interested. Bulgasari is completely lost, and what we know of it comes from reviews in South Korean newspapers. It was the story of a martial artist living in the Goryeo dynasty, where he's murdered. His anger and hate causes him to reincarnate as Bulgasari, a giant lizard monster who seeks to destroy South Korea. This film was hated unanimously, calling it trashy and childish, which is lame. This movie sounds sick as fuck, and I want to watch it, but I can't, thanks to the Korean War. Like we mentioned, like an hour ago with Chunhaein, most films created in South Korea are missing, thanks to the island's century of turmoil. 1963, Babushka Lady footage. On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy would become the 4th United States president to be assassinated. Decision 1964 was on the horizon, and Kennedy was seeking re-election, but his victory wasn't exactly a guarantee, and one of the states he was worried about losing was Texas. He previously won the state by 46,000 votes, which was one of his slimmest margins, and according to polls, this margin was slipping. So to help regain his vote, he planned a 5-city tour of Texas, but only made it to 2. Immediately after John Kennedy was killed, a massive investigation surrounding every detail of that fateful day began. And the key piece of evidence used during investigations was the Zapruder film, which provided our clearest look at the event. But as the Zapruder film and other various photographs were reviewed, a mysterious figure was present in all of them. An older woman wearing a headscarf and sunglasses holding what's assumed to be a camera. She was incredibly close to the presidential motorcade, with some estimates placing her a mere 20 feet away from the president. This means, if that is a camera, she has the closest available footage of the assassination. To put this in perspective, the Zapruder film was taken 65 feet away from Kennedy. Because of her insanely close proximity, attempts at locating the Babushka lady and her captured footage have been underway since that fateful day in November, but nothing has been found. We don't even know this lady's name, and a few people have stepped forward claiming to be her, with the best well-known individual being Beverly Oliver. Beverly said that she was the Babushka lady, and that FBI agents stopped her and took her footage, promising her it would be returned later, but it never was. However, Beverly's claims have no proof behind them and have widely been dismissed. 1964 Eurovision. We have another Eurovision to discuss, this one being the 1964 edition. This time, 16 countries performed one song apiece, and Italy came away the winner. There were several protesters in attendance at this Eurovision because of the inclusion of Portugal and Spain, which were being ran by right-wing dictators, and protesters called for their removal. We have a lot of this Eurovision today, but not all of it. Let's start with what we do have. First of all, a full radio broadcast of the event survives today, as do segments of the live broadcast, including the winning performance and the opening. As for the full broadcast, a lot of rumors and misinformation are continually spread about it, including that a tape was stashed in the Drimsh archives, which is not true. Same as the rumor that a tape of it was burnt. It's not known if a full version of Eurovision 1964 survives today. Dr. Strangelove is a satirical black and white comedy based on the tensions of the Cold War. It was written and produced by the legendary Stanley Kubrick and originally came out in 1964. The movie is based around a group of politicians trying to prevent a nuclear war from happening. As it is now, the film ends with the titular Dr. Strangelove standing from his wheelchair exclaiming he has an idea, before the film abruptly cuts to a montage of nuclear bombs. However, this wasn't how the film originally ended. The original ending was 11 minutes long and began with the American general noticing the Russian ambassador taking pictures of plans with cameras. The two then get into a fight, and the ambassador eventually throws a pie at him. This turns into a full-on fight between everyone in the room. Eventually, the Russian ambassador and the American president begin gathering the custard to build a sandcastle, completely losing their minds. That's how the film originally ended. So why was it changed? Well, the movie was originally supposed to be screened on November 22nd, 1963. And if that date sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's the day JFK was assassinated. Alright, big deal, whatever. I mean, yeah, president died, but it's just a movie. But in this ending scene, during the pie fight, the president is hit in the back of the head with one, to which someone yells out, "Our president has been struck down in his prime." But Kubrick said he cut the scene before the assassination. This is because he wanted the pie fight to be played completely seriously. He intended it to be a metaphor for MAD, or mutually assured destruction. The idea that if someone launches a nuke at a country, the defender is gonna fire back, and it would just be a big mess. If I get destroyed, you get destroyed too. Or in the case of Dr. Strangelove, if I get hit with a pie, you get hit with a pie. The actors also couldn't take the scene seriously, as they were just laughing the entire time. Most of the scene is missing, with the only thing that remains being a handful of stills from behind the scenes. 1965, Dr. Zen. We have our first anime of the list, Dr. Zen. This was a show consisting of many episodes released between May and November of 1965. It's believed that about 100 episodes were made of the show, but all of the original Japanese ones are missing. However, during development, an American remake of the show entered production, and we have 6 episodes from that available today. 1966, Jimmy Bryan Memorial. Jimmy Bryan was a racer for both the AAA and USAC racing leagues and was well accomplished in his career, winning the championship in 1954, 56, and 57. He also won the Indy 500 in 1957. Unfortunately, his career as a race car driver would come to an end on June 19, 1960, when he crashed. On this same day, 2 drivers participating in the Belgian Grand Prix also crashed and lost their lives, making this one of the deadliest days in racing history. Between the years of 1965 through 68, the Jimmy Bryan Memorial Race was held at the Phoenix Raceway in Arizona, and we are discussing the 66 race. This race was known to be televised, but we have no footage of it available. The IndyCar 500 on TV was said to have broadcasted 30 minutes of the race, but they were not saved. Now, we are getting closer to the VCR era television, allowing for home recordings, but they were 5 years away at the time of this race, with the first one coming out in 1971. 1967, Doctor Who. Throughout the iceberg, we've mentioned the practice of tape wiping several times, where recorded tapes would have their footage deleted so that they could be used for new programs. One of the best well-known shows that this affected was Doctor Who. Several episodes of this show are lost today, but the number of lost episodes has dwindled over the decades thanks to Discovery. However, there is another piece of Doctor Who media that is lost, which is completely separate from the TV show. In 1967, 4 years after the show came out, a radio show spin-off was to be created. Following the pilot, there were plans for 52 episodes in total to be created, and the titular Doctor Who would be played by Peter Cushing, best well known for his role in Star Wars as Grand Moff Tarkin. The pilot for the show was created, an episode called Journey into Time, but it's missing today, and the 52 additional episodes never saw the light of day. What we do have of the pilot is the script, which was found stashed away in the BBC archives in 2012. Following the release of the script, a fan adaptation of the episode was made, but the official thing is still missing. 1968, etc. The Beatles are one of the most famous bands to ever perform, and they are no stranger to lost media. With the band itself being active for 10 years, and the individual members being active for years after, it's pretty much a guarantee that some songs would slip through the cracks, and the crown jewel of Beatles lost media is Carnival of Light. But one topic not as discussed is etc. This was a song recorded by Paul McCartney that was never released. The story begins with Marianne Faithfull, another English singer. The song was given to her by Paul McCartney for her to record, but she passed on it, as did the other Beatles. But McCartney himself recorded a demo, and the tape was taken by an assistant of George Martin, and it has not been seen since. McCartney wasn't a fan of the recording and stated he was glad it was never released. However, a sound engineer who heard it said the song was beautiful. Regardless if it's a boom or a doom, it's not been heard by more than it seems 3 people, but it is possible that the master tape is stored somewhere. Chris Thomas, the guy who took the tape, is still alive, so it might be worth looking into. 1969, Sobakasu Pushi. Here's our second anime of our list, and we do have some parts of this one. I'd sure hope so, considering it has 162 episodes that air between the months of March and October of 1969. The anime in question is Sobakasu Puchi, which features a boy, Puchi, his parrot Ganko, and a monster named Notaru. The show was aired on Fuji TV exclusively and was not shown anywhere else, hampering its archival. Also, there were no home releases, and damn, I lied, all 162 episodes are missing. The only thing we have is the opening. What a tragedy. Once the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11 landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969, they used high-quality 16mm cameras to document their small steps for man. But getting this footage to a live TV broadcast for anyone back on Earth was a different beast. The signal from the astronaut's camera was broadcasted back to Earth using a signal encoder called an SSTV. And this allowed image to be embedded into audio data to be transmitted back as a radio signal. This SSTV was then picked up at multiple stations across Earth. At these stations, the signal had 2 branches. One that went into a backup tape recorder, and one that was meant to be broadcasted for everyone at home. However, the data coming from the astronauts' cameras was incompatible with the TV stations. So to allow everyone on Earth to see the moon landing, a primitive form of broadcasting was used. The signal was put up on high-quality screens at the varying TV stations, and another camera was set up here to record the screen, like the olden days of Let's Play. This recording was then sent to Mission Control in Houston, Texas, and from there it was sent to consumers' TVs. So the only video from the moon landing is in severely worse quality than what a few technicians could witness at the ground station before the Let's Play conversion took place. In recent years, interest in the original SSTV data recorded at the TV stations has risen. However, after extensive research, no copies of the original image signal have shown up. According to NASA, it's very likely that these tapes were wiped for reuse. Was that confusing? I bet it kinda was, because I was getting confused writing it. So let's try and take a step back and simplify it. The astronauts land on the moon, they record the moon. That moon footage hits a screen and TV stations. That signal at the station can't go to regular people. A camera was then set up to record the screen, and then it was distributed to regular people. Did I get that right? I'm sure I'll be told if I didn't. 1970, Surprise. Sesame Street is also no stranger to lost media. Again, it's a show that's been going for decades. It's bound to have pieces lost. And the most famous piece of lost Sesame Street media was the episode featuring Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz. Of course, this episode was finally found after an extensive search, and our entry today was found by a less than extensive search. Surprise was a short created during the 2nd season of the show. The short features a song about surprises, the good parts and the bad parts, and features some of the characters surprising each other. The short was missing for a while, and the first lead to its discovery came in 2006. The short in its entirety was posted to YouTube, but this was the German dub. In 2007, Viacom struck down hundreds of thousands of videos on YouTube, and this was included. It wouldn't be for another 14 years until the German dub resurfaced. Then we go to February 11, 2022, where the Sesame Street Twitter posted a clip of the song that was considered missing. Then, with the pieces that were found previously, it was put together. And then on June 22nd, 2022, YouTuber PoopTubeU uploaded the full English version of Surprise, marking it as found. 1971 Heart. When I first picked the entry for 1971 and saw there was a lost Soviet film called Heart, I figured this would be a beautiful tale of tragic lost love, but no, the name is very literal. This was an animated film about heart care. It was created under order of the World Health Organization. It features a man who lives inside a heart, or his heart, it's not really clear, but he's treating the heart horribly. He's smoking, drinking, and being lazy, leading to the heart falling apart. For a while, this cartoon was obscure, well, more obscure, to the point that only stills existed, but it's viewable in its entirety today, so let's discuss its discovery. It was known to be shown at the 6th International Film Festival on Health Protection for Socialist Countries in 1972, pick a shorter fucking name. And again, it was shown at the 5th International Film Festival dedicated to the work of the Red Cross in 1973. At both events, the director was given an award. Afterwards, the short was just chilling on some Russian forum and was later uploaded to YouTube, marking it as found. 1972, Ultraman Ace Hiroshima Attack. The Ultra series features the titular Ultraman and his fight against kaiju-like characters. The series was created in 1966 and remains kind of popular today. The 5th show in the series is Ultraman Ace, coming out in 1972, and this entry deals with a deleted scene in the first episode. The said scene features the villainous kaiju Velocron destroying Hiroshima, with his target being the Genbaku Dome, a symbol of the city that was injured in the atomic bombings. Of course, this scene was controversial and was not included in the final product. Today, we only have screenshots, and some believe these are fake, and this is one big rumor. The Day the Clown Cried is an unreleased and unfinished film that centers around a clown named Helmut Dork, who soon becomes a political prisoner in a concentration camp after he drunkenly mocked the Chancellor. Here, he finds a new audience in the young Jewish children, and he ultimately becomes the one to lead them to the gas chambers, in an attempt to make their last few moments happy ones. Jerry Lewis was set to play the clown. Lewis was known for his comedy roles at the time, but he was eager to take the role in an attempt to grow his skills in more dramatic and serious performances. He rewrote the script from the ground up, and this was only the beginning of production problems. The film ran out of budget before it was finished, causing Lewis to invest his own money. It then turned out that Nathan Washburger, one of the film's producers, never secured the rights from Joan O'Brien, the original scriptwriter. This ended in 2 versions of the film being taken, one by Lewis and one by Washburger. Washburger never did anything with his copy, but Lewis continued to work on his, even making plans to show it at the Cannes Film Festival. These plans were never followed through on, and the film remains unreleased to this day. There are several copies of the film floating out there, and one such belongs to Xavier Giannoli, who publicly revealed in 2012 he has an incomplete copy which he has hosted several private showings with. 1973, Melodifestifin. Melodifestifin is the precursor to Eurovision for Sweden. It's a contest held in Sweden to determine who will be sent to represent the country in the European contest. The event was televised on February 10th, 1973, and it's notable for being one of the first televised appearances of ABBA. ABBA finished in 3rd. This is only one of a few televised Melodifestifins to not be preserved in its entirety, as only clips exist now. Luxembourg went on to win Eurovision that year, but ABBA would win the following year. 1974 WFA Cup Final. Here we have another missing soccer match, this time ending the 1973 through 74 WFA season. It saw a victory for Fawdens, defeating Southampton 2-1. No footage is available, but some exist. An article was written about the game describing the footage of it, but it's not public today. 1975, Kiran Monoshari Khan. This one blew my mind. Kiran Monoshari Khan was an anime that aired between 1975 through 84. So keep that in mind, on the air for nearly a decade, so it had to be at least decently popular. In those 9 years, 1,560 episodes aired. And would you like to guess how many are available today? There are some, so take a guess. If you said 1, you're wrong. If you said 2, you're wrong. If you said 3, you're wrong. No, you're right, there's 3. Only 3 out of 1,560 episodes are available today. The anime itself followed a cat and a mouse who taught history and got into fights. Sounds like Tom and Jerry, except in the middle of their chases, Tom stops and looks at the camera and says, "Say Jerry, do you know what happened in Beijing on April 15th, 1989? The show was never adapted for American audiences, and an episode was uploaded by a YouTuber, but this episode has a different theme compared to the other two, leaving us with a lot of questions with no answers." 1976, Heavyweight Champ. And now, we've reached our first missing arcade game, that being Heavyweight Champ, which also set the record for the first fighting game to be created. It was created in Japan by Sega and was later remade in the 80s, which overshadowed the original 1976 game. The cabinet had a boxing glove that functioned as a joystick for both players, and once it was moved in that direction, it meant a punch was thrown that way, scoring a point. The only footage we have of the game comes from a news report featuring it, and there has been a search for a cabinet. I'm pretty interested in Lost Arcade games as a whole, and we will discuss a few throughout the iceberg. But if that's something you're interested in as a standalone video, please let me know. I've said that a few times now. 1977, The Farmer. The Farmer is a movie about a World War II veteran who returns home a hero, but his farm was foreclosed on by the bank, and the film features him attempting to raise money to save it. The film had limited amount of theater releases, leading to its loss, but today it's found, so let's discuss its discovery. We begin in 2006, when a company called Code Red DVD stated they were in possession of a copy and were about to release it to the public to view. They were even attaching the trailer to the film to other DVD releases by them, hyping up its eventual release that never came. Alright, Code Red failed us, what's next? 14 years later, a bootleg DVD copy of the film was discovered and uploaded to YouTube, where it was blocked. However, a week after this, Lost Media Wiki user Tropes Are Dangerous was able to use a YouTube video downloader to retrieve the film, uploading it to the Internet Archive. He also did this with Crazy House a few entries back. 1978, Castle Take. While we're at it, let's discuss another missing arcade game. This time, it's Castle Take. It's another Japanese cabinet, but this one was produced by Senkyo. The game had an advanced graphics card for its time, allowing for it to have more color compared to others of the time. The game itself is similar to Atari's Breakout, but Castle Take had a feudal Japanese-inspired set of levels. Each level required players to break all blocks of the same color. Currently, there is no recorded footage of gameplay, with what we know coming from reviews of the time, but various photos of the game screens have surfaced on Twitter, meaning there are cabinets available to be played, or there was. It's not known how many cabinets were made, but it can be assumed it was pretty popular, as a sequel was produced. A story we pick back up with the next entry. 1979, Pyramid. Pyramid was the sequel to Castle Take. It's another breakout clone created by Senkyo, but this time, it had an ancient Egyptian theme. From what we can see, levels would represent symbols of ancient Egypt made of horizontal and vertical lines that players would need to break to advance. This game appears to be less popular than Castle Take. Neither got home releases, but Castle Take at least warranted a sequel, that being Pyramid. There were some videos of gameplay footage, but they have been privated. However, a news channel in Japan did a piece on arcades, and included was footage of Pyramid, giving us an idea what the game looked like. Hey, if I have any fans in Japan, this is now your homework. Get out there and find me a copy of Pyramid and a copy of Castle Take. 1980, Swords Quest Airwheel. Swords Quest was a series of games created for the Atari 2600, with a total of 3 being released. Each game was focused on a classical element, earth, fire, water, and the focus of our entry, air. Earth was first being released in October of 1982. followed by Fire in February of 1983, and again followed by Waterworld in the same month, which is crazy. Each game in the series was building up to a contest, with the first one to beat the game to be crowned the winner, to be given a $25,000 prize in the form of a piece of jewelry from the game. This would culminate into a final contest for the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery, a $50,000 prize. Said prize was a sword from the game, bejeweled with diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and other precious gemstones. If this sounds very expensive to you, then you'd be correct. If you're wondering how Atari could afford it, the answer is they couldn't. It's known the 3 game prizes were released, but the final one for Airwheel was never given out, because the 4th game was cancelled. It never came out, and all 5 prizes are up in the air. I know I keep saying this, I want to make separate videos on this stuff, and this is one more to add to the list. An investigation into the 4 games, the 5 prizes, and the history behind each one and where they ended up. If that's something you're interested in, for sure let me know. 1981, The Burning soundtrack. The Burning was a horror film very similar to Friday the 13th, with some even calling it a ripoff. Regardless if it's its own thing or a ripoff, the soundtrack to the film is missing. But you might ask me, how is the soundtrack missing if the film is found? And I was about to answer that. Quit being so pushy. This is because some songs included in the film were not on the released soundtrack. The soundtrack only has some of the songs used, and the missing ones are not available anywhere else. The film's composer is Rick Wakeman, who is still alive, and it might be worth it to reach out and ask about these missing films. But remember, when speaking to anyone about missing work, be respectful. Don't go out and harass people, because it's likely they don't have it. 1982, Ben Bum Bam. Ben Bum Bam was an Italian children's show created in 1982. It had some history behind this, with the show's name being juggled between different studios, but finally, the first season would be aired in 1982. The show featured different comedic sketches and musical segments, but most of the first season is missing. This is due to legal disputes surrounding the mergers and deals with studios we mentioned earlier. We do have some pieces of the first season, thanks to a lady named Caterina Cantone, a teenager at the time of the show's airing. She was one of the lucky few in the world to have a VCR at this time, and provided her home recordings of the show, leading to some of it being found. But the vast majority of the first season is missing. However, everything past season 1 is found. 1983, Dreamhouse. Is this our first game show? I kinda forget. It might be, I don't remember. Maybe I have dementia. Dreamhouse was a game show that aired between 1983 and 84. It was hosted by Mike Dare for the show's initial run in 1968, but the version we're concerned with was hosted by Bob Eubanks. The show featured couples competing to win a new house, something that was not needed in 1983 because houses cost like $4. Bring back Dreamhouse and have couples compete for a house now, even if it requires Hunger Games-style killings. Alright, we're back on track. After the first episode was aired, it was never rerun, any of it. And if you're holding out to watch the esteemed 1983 game show Dreamhouse, then I'm sorry. Because all 385 episodes were destroyed in a flood that ruined the house of the creator. And could you imagine just walking down to your basement and there's water pouring onto your 385 episode collection of Dreamhouse? What a mess! There does remain a few home recordings, but the master tape of all the episodes are gone forever. If there's one thing the lost media community likes, it's a search for a missing song. And while not as known as the upcoming Everyone Knows That, Subways of Your Mind is another song that was at the forefront of an extended search. In 2007, a user part of a song forum posted 75 seconds of a mysterious song, the most mysterious song, asking if anyone knew what it was. It was simply titled Blind the Wind, and the original user, Lydia, stated that her brother, Darius, recorded it. The search at this time didn't get much attention, and it would be furthered by Justin Wang's video on the topic in 2019, 12 years later. And just a mere 3 days after this, the full song was found. But now we have the song, but it's not known who made the song. Furthered searches that even got Lydia and Darius involved once more led Reddit user Marin1412 to a German newspaper who discussed FEX. Upon reaching out to this band, they revealed that yes, this was their song, and they sent a demo of the original to the Reddit user, marking the song, demo, and band as found. 1984 Gremlins arcade game. We're back with another arcade game, but it appears this one was never finalized for the public. It was based off the hit movie released in the same year, and was to be released in 85, but development began in 84. For a long time, the game was considered to be a rumor, but a prototype was unearthed where it gave us a look at gameplay. Again, the ROM has not been dumped, leaving it as lost. 1985 Clue's fourth ending. 1985's Clue, much in the spirit of the board game, had 4 different endings, changing who the film's murderer was. On home releases of the movie, 3 out of 4 endings were included, but fans of the movie remember seeing a 4th ending when they saw it in theaters, but this ending has not resurfaced. This ending, according to said fans, revealed that Wadsworth was the killer, who makes a run from the police after being discovered, with the film fading away as he got away. This ending was included in the movie novelization, and some fans claim to see it aired on TV showings, but this is yet to be proven. 1986 Pre-Challenger SOTU. The State of the Union address is a speech given every year in the United States. Its name is literal. It's a report on how the country is doing. It's held in a joint session of Congress near the beginning of the year, and it's delivered by the President of the United States. The 1986 State of the Union was originally set to be delivered on January 28, 1986, the same day the Challenger space shuttle was to take off. As we know, the Challenger tragically exploded soon after its takeoff, causing all the crew members, including a schoolteacher, to lose their lives. Ronald Reagan addressed the nation that night, but not in the form of the State of the Union, just a night dedicated to those who lost their lives. The State of the Union was moved a week ahead and was delivered on February 4th. This has caused people to speculate about what the original State of the Union would have been about. The Challenger's flight had been delayed several times, and this started in July of 1985. In fact, in the days leading up to the flight, NASA's engineers recommended it be delayed once again, as they were worried about O-ring seals located inside the boosters. Despite this, the flight went on, and the engineers' concerns were right, as this is what caused the Challenger to fail. Let's get back to Ronald Reagan. On the morning of the launch, the Wall Street Journal reported that Reagan would include a segment dedicated to heroes. In particular, Reagan wanted to speak to Krista McAuliffe, the aforementioned schoolteacher on the Challenger. Putting all of this together causes people to believe the Challenger launch was rushed so it could be included in the State of the Union. This was denied by the Reagan administration, and the smoking gun, a verified pre-Challenger disaster copy of the SOTU, has not come forward, leaving people to speculate the true background of the incident. Here we are 3 entries later, and we can discuss the lost song. One that was found last year in 2024, and it was found in the funniest way possible. First of all, the song was brought to the public's conscience in 2021, when a user on whatsthatsong.com uploaded a snippet of it, and the search began from there. People tried looking through the lyrics and searching for what it was, but honestly, the song was pretty hard to hear, so this became a Herculean effort. For 3 years, this is how the search progressed. Little leads and people thinking they knew what the song was, but not actually finding it. No. To find the song, it was going to take something stronger. The world's strongest gooner. On April 28, 2024, Reddit user South Pole Ball and OneTruth587 were enjoying an adult movie from the 80s, and they heard the song in the background. Following its discovery, the creators of the song, Christopher and Philippe Booth, came out with praise for the search and provided a full copy of the song on June 24, 2024, marking it as found. 1987 Apt Pupil. When you think of horror writers, who is the first name to come to mind? It probably depends on your genre of horror, but I'd bet at least half of you immediately think of Stephen King, and it's no wonder as to why. With over 65 books published and 0 of them being good, King has carved himself a slice of the horror genre, a fame furthered by film adaptations of his work, including It, The Shining, and Pet Sematary. But one movie not as known as Apt Pupil. based off the book of the same name released in 1982. Now, an adaptation of the book was released in 1998, and this one is fully viewable today. But there was an attempt to adapt it 15 years prior in 1987. This film was being directed by British director Alan Bridges, and it was making good progress, with 40 minutes of film being released. This made up about 3/4 of the film, but this is as far as he could go, because he ran out of money. To this day, not a single minute of the 40 has been seen. 1988, The Noids. In the 1980s, famed pizza chain Domino's had this creature as a mascot. This is the Noid, and his whole purpose was to be a problem. Domino's guaranteed a delivery in under 30 minutes, and the Noid would set out to stop the deliveries, and then the company's whole slogan became Avoid the Noid. Harmless fun, right? Well, it would be if your name wasn't Kenneth Lamar Noid. Months of hearing this whole Avoid the Noid thing made him believe Domino's was specifically telling people to avoid him. This made the man snap, snapping to the point of a hostage situation. On January 30th, 1989, Noid, the man, not the mascot, took 2 hostages at a Domino's restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia. After being held for 5 hours, the hostages were released unharmed. After this, Domino's would soon retire the Noid character. But prior to all of this, CBS was working on a TV show called The Noids, featuring a group of Noids attempting to stop pizza deliveries. The show didn't make it very far into production, as it was labeled as a simple marketing gimmick, not an actual TV show for children. This, combined with the whole hostage thing, caused the show to be cancelled before a single episode was completed. However, one of the designers uploaded artwork he drew for the show in 2009. 1989, Macy's Day Parade. We discussed the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade like 2 hours ago, but this is one more people are familiar with because of the search that went along with it. The '89 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was the 63rd one to be held. Upon review, it was noticed that this parade in particular was missing, which was weird, because a lot of the ones surrounding it were found. The first parts of the parade were uploaded to YouTube in 2015, but a lot was missing. 3 years later in 2018, a website was found to have a full copy of the broadcast, and afterwards, it was uploaded to the Internet Archive in its entirety on December 18th, 2019, marking it found. However, maybe this one should have stayed lost, as it was a disaster. In the beginning, the Snoopy and Woodstock balloons were popped, so archive footage of their appearance from last year was used. Winds caused the Bugs Bunny balloon to fly high into the air, dragging a person with it, before it popped. So archive footage for this balloon was also used. An additional 3 balloons were popped as well, meaning 5 in total were destroyed during this mess of a parade. 1990, Astro Farm. We are in the final decade now, and we're starting with Astro Farm. Astro Farm was a claymation animated film that initially aired between 1991 and 1996. The show features a family who lived on an asteroid farm, and they go through wacky hijinks as you do. Despite the show airing on British TV and later Nick Jr., most of it is missing. Out of 53 episodes, 19 are found, 1 is partially lost, and 33 are completely missing, over half of the show. A handful of promotional material, including bumpers, have also been found. 1991, Euphoria: The Saga. In 1991, a video game called Hibreke was released in Japan. It was created by Sunsoft and featured a snowman character searching for his friends. After it was released in Japan, an advertisement for an American adaptation was found, but the game would never officially be released. This was due to the character design being strange and quirky, drawing comparisons to Disney cartoons. What a bizarre reason to not release a game. However, in 2010, the game was released on the Wii Virtual Console, and in 2014, it was put on the Wii U. But these games were different compared to the Japanese release. The US version was running off the PAL system, as no NTSC mode was available for the game. This is basically different resolutions for games. The PAL had a 20% better resolution. We then go forward to 2021, where Lost Media Wiki user Armadillo found the original American prototype version, dumping the ROM for everyone to play, marking it as found. 1992, Toy Story test footage. Nowadays, Pixars are staples in the animation community, and I guarantee everyone watching this video has watched at least one Pixar movie. And if you say you haven't, then you're lying and I hate you. They got their start in 1995 with the release of Toy Story, which should have ended at 3 parts, but now we're on 5, but whatever, Jim Morris needs more money. Toy Story was the first fully computer animated film, and the road to this point was filled with tests and renders and different cuts, and we're talking about one of these today. Maybe. I'll explain. In 1992, Pixar made test footage for Toy Story, and it features some early character designs that were later changed. Most notably, Buzz has a more red color scheme compared to the green and white he ended up with. Also, in the footage, he's voiced by Billy Crystal, and in the film, of course, Tim Allen played him. But this footage is available to watch, so why are we talking about it? Well, some people believe there is more footage floating around based off of nothing. Based off the fact that animation studios usually have tons of footage laying around. And some people think there's more Toy Story stuff to be found. And there probably is, but that's based off assumption and not facts. 1993, U2 Zoo TV Tour. When I think of U2, my mind immediately goes to their shitty album they forced every Apple user to listen to with their latest iOS update. I also think of a person I know in real life who spent several grand to see them at the Las Vegas Sphere. Yeah, several grand to see fucking U2. Something that continually blows my mind is just how long U2 has been around. They were founded in 1976, 40 years ago. They've made music for 44 years. How do you make music for 4 decades and not make a single good song? 17 years into their career, they began the Zoo TV Tour to promote an album released in 1991, and another released in that same year of 1993. While a lot of this footage of this tour is available and was saved, there is none available from their time in Tokyo. There were 2 shows at the Tokyo Dome, but neither are available today. If you ask me, this is one piece of lost media I believe should stay lost. 1994, Ayrton Senna crash photos. On April 28, 1994, the San Marino Grand Prix began, and Brazilian driver Ayrton Senna was participating. This was preceded by a successful career in Formula 1 driving. Previously, he had won 6 Grand Prix, including a World Championship in '89, followed by 2 more in '90 and '91, making him the youngest back-to-back 3 times world champion. So he was at the peak of his career when the San Marino Grand Prix rolled around in 1994, and he was one of the favorites to win. Unfortunately, at the start of the actual Grand Prix, Ayrton would crash, hitting a concrete barrier at 145 miles per hour. He was alive, barely. He was life-flighted to the Bologna Maggiore Hospital, but he wouldn't last for long, as he was pronounced dead soon after the helicopter touched down. Prior to this airlift, a man named Angelo Orsi was on the scene, and documenting the crash through a series of photos. He was a close friend of Senna, and was one of the only photographers nearby, so he took photos of the scene, including stills of the driver lying in his car, his removal, and finally ending with the treatment of the on-site medical staff. Once Orsi went home, he reviewed his photos and showed them to Senna's family. They are the only ones known to have seen them, and Orsi has refused to reveal them, matching the wishes of Senna's family. Other photos of the accident are available, but Orsi refuses to show his own. Unfortunately, Kurt Cobain, the lead singer in Nirvana, would take his own life on April 5th, 1994. Prior to this, though, he had met with the rest of the band members to record a new album. Between January 28th through the 30th, the band would meet and record for one last time. This was sort of unorganized, with Dave Grohl saying they just went to the studio just to record something. In total, 14 songs were recorded during these days, but only a few of them exist today. The most prominent ones are Exhausted and Big Me, which were later repurposed for the Foo Fighters' first album. The band Dave Grohl joined after leaving Nirvana. The rest of these songs range from Trash Tune, which was just noise, and Skid Mark, which was just Dave Grohl shouting Skid Mark over and over again for a minute and a half. On Sunday, the last day of recording, Cobain showed up, and they just made music. They went on for 20 minutes, but none of this has been released. Cobain left the studio in high spirits, but unfortunately, he would take his own life mere months later. 1995, the Honey Rods. The Honey Rods were a group of 5 musicians based out of Nashville, Tennessee that had a small following. They were active between 1994 and 97, and put out 2 EPs and 1 record before breaking up soon after. This entry refers to the first EP, as it was missing for a while. It consisted of 5 songs, but all of them were missing. This was due to it being the first album from an obscure band. Of course it was going to go missing. But a member of the Lost Media Wiki named Teddy got in contact with a member of Discogs, who was said to have copies of the Honey Rod's first EP. The user sent Teddy MP3s of all the band's songs, to which they were uploaded to Dropbox and afterwards to YouTube, marking them as found. 1996, Angie Martinez Tupac Shakur interview. Even if you don't like rap music, you know the name Tupac Shakur, because of his unfortunate death as a result of the East versus West Coast feud Shakur was at the head of. Even today, Shakur is celebrated as one of the most talented rappers to live, and people have clamored around his name, attempting to find every trace of him possible. One of these massive searches centers around an interview hosted by Angie Martinez. Angie was a New York City radio host who spoke to Shakur for 2 hours, discussing topics such as his music, his story, and even some political issues. Above all else, Shakur was speaking about the coastal feud and how he hoped it would end. Angie described the interview as intense, saying Tupac spoke with passion, intellect, and anger. Like we said, they spoke for 2 hours in total, but only brief segments are available today, leading to speculation surrounding what was cut and for what reason. 1997 Space World 97 demo. Pokemon Gold and Silver were the sequels to the acclaimed Red, Blue, and Green, released in 1995. Immediately after their release and almost instant overnight success, development on the aforementioned sequels began, with them coming out in 1999. But on the road to release, the company had several stages of development that introduced new concepts to the franchise, alongside some Pokemon that didn't make it into the final version. The first demo for the game was available to play at Nintendo's annual Space World event. Originally lasting for 10 minutes per person, it had to be shortened to 5 due to the insane amount of people wanting to try the game out. With the whole explosion of lost media in the last decade, this was something that had an extensive search, and it was found in 2018. Prior to its complete discovery, only 15 seconds of footage existed from an interview. But then just randomly in 2018, 4 ROMs of the game were dumped onto a Discord server by a user who remains anonymous to this day. Nothing is known about them, how they got an original Space World demo, or anything of the sort. They just uploaded it and vanished. It's fully found today, and people have played through it. Further looks into the game's files revealed sprites for Pokemon that were not added or were changed. I personally like this thing. It's like some sort of deep sea eel or something. It's cool. Other differences compared to the official game exist, and one right off the bat is that the starting town is called Silent Hills, which had to be changed due to fears of copyright infringement. Alright, 3 more entries. Let's get it done. 1998 Cavalis Cable Car Disaster. Upon the reading of this entry, I was left saying 2 words: Jesus Christ. On February 3rd, 1998, a United States EA-68 Prowler aircraft was participating in a training exercise in Italy. The plane had 2 occupants, Captain Richard Ashby as the pilot, and the navigator Joseph Schwetzler. Ashby was flying too low and too fast, and consequently, snapped a cable supporting a car at a ski resort. Unfortunately, 20 people in the car were killed. Investigations and trials began, but in the end, the crew was found not guilty of unintentional homicide, but they were found guilty of evidence tampering. This was due to the fact that the video camera inside the plane's cockpit was destroyed by the crew. The crew claimed there was no incriminating footage of themselves in it, just being used to capture the Italian scenery, but we have no idea, as this was the only copy and it's gone forever. 1999 Slamfest 99. We've reached probably the most extensive, drawn out, and yet more than likely hopeless searches for a piece of lost media. Of course, we're talking about Slamfest 99. This was a promotion for the North American release of Super Smash Bros. On the N64, and was to be a live wrestling match featuring 4 costume Super Smash Bros. Characters. On the same day of the event, first-hand accounts were posted online, but there was no footage posted. So let's begin the search in 2014, where the original webpage promoting the event was found, and included was a link to a recording of the event. But that link was dead, so we continue. And really, the search for Slamfest, which is a banger video title, has stretched on for 11 years, and we have no footage of it. It seems every lead has been exhausted, but some people hold out hope that Slamfest 99 will be found.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy
2000. The turn of the millennium, the culmination of the Y2K craze, and our video. I think it's only fitting we end the video with a piece of found media. And at that, a piece of media that was found very recently. Not only was it found recently, I feel it reflects the year perfectly. Of course, I'm talking about the Pokemon Adventure web game. This was released in the year 2000 to coincide with the movie that came out in the same year. The game was only available for a month before it was taken down due to a contract dispute with Cyberworld, the game's publisher. The search for this game consisted of multiple Lost Media Wiki members coming together, and the first step was to contact Neil Marshall, a programmer who previously wrote about his efforts in the game's takedown. Neil didn't have a copy himself, but another developer did. On May 16th, 2023, a YouTuber named Every Game Ever released a video featuring an interview with Marshall and another developer named Eddie Romanski. Eddie then revealed he had a CD with the game's files, and he would then send assets from the game to Did You Know Gaming. And from here, Lost Media Wiki users Rufus10 and Doomtay was able to restore the game from what was discovered. It was uploaded to the Internet Archive on September 17th, 2023, marking the game as found, and bringing 100 years of Lost Media to a close. And here we are again. I just wanted to say a quick thank you for watching, especially if you watched twice. I've got some new, not re-released videos coming soon, so stay tuned for that. I think the next one is 2 weeks from now. Special thanks for the Lost Media Wiki for having all this information easily accessible, and yeah, that's really it for me today. I hope you all have a safe and wonderful weekend.